Chapter 29-26. Qin Chen's smile was a little subtle. The little nurse took it for granted. It was Mr. Yi who personally invited a feng shui master to choose the place for you. Because the best place was the director's office, so, the little nurse's voice lowered. The director moved to another place to work. Qin Chen smiled indifferently. Was I so domineering at that time? No. It was Mr. Yi who loved you. The little nurse quickly waved her hand. Qin Chen didn't say anything more. The elevator had reached the 26th floor and stopped with a ding. The little nurse led the way in front and explained, "Our hospital has adopted the latest fingerprint lock, so Dr. Qin, you can go in and have a look now." After that, she stopped at the door of an office. Qin Chen raised his finger slightly, and the fingerprint immediately opened the door lock. He looked at the little nurse. The little nurse explained with a smile, "It was probably Mr. Yi who went to your place to collect the fingerprint." Qin Chen smiled and opened the door. He said softly, "I want to have a look alone." The little nurse nodded. When she was about to leave, she suddenly turned her head and looked at Qin Chen. "By the way, Dr. Qin, President Lan is still living in the same VIP ward, number 288. As she said that, she blinked. Qin Chen coughed slightly. "How did you know that I came to see him?" The little nurse smiled. "You have pepper spray in your hand, and President Lan is the only one in the whole hospital who has a new grudge against you." Qin Chen stood there. Her heart sank. Another person told her about her past with Lan Yu. She said with difficulty, "Do I have a deep grudge against him?" The little nurse looked at Qin Chen's expression, gave a hollow laugh, and asked carefully, "Dr. Qin, you don't have amnesia, do you?" Qin Chen nodded. The little nurse wanted to beat herself to death. She really had amnesia. Qin Chen's amnesia was very unique. Due to the mistake of Rong Lei's water of time, her memory was fragmented, and the part that belonged to Lan Yu was sealed. Moreover, some fragments related to Lan Yu were also sealed, so his memories were somewhat fragmented. This was especially true for Xingyuan, an important place. She couldn't remember many people with important clues. Qin Chen pursed his lips and smiled faintly. The young nurse was quite upset. Although Dr. Qin was very beautiful now, she still liked the handsome Dr. Qin. At least at that time, Dr. Qin had President Lan. Now, the young nurse left the room. Qin Chen's eyes were profound as he slowly pushed the door open. Inside, there was not a speck of dust. There was something familiar about it. She walked over and touched the expensive porcelain, the coffee set, and the Italian luxury brand calf leather sofa. This place is full of extravagance, but the taste is good. Following his intuition, Qin Chen walked to a place and opened the jar. The coffee beans inside were intact. She smelled them. They were very fragrant. The blood in her bones told her which domestic coffee beans were from, how much they were worth, and how many grams should be used to make a cup of coffee. Thinking about it, she had already begun to weigh the coffee and wash the coffee pot. When the aroma filled the air, she walked to the dressing room inside and opened the closet door. A large row of men's clothes were hung neatly, and the brands were so extravagant that she couldn't bear to look at them. Now that Qin Chen was in the fashion industry, she wouldn't wear such top-notch brands. It would feel too pretentious. Not to mention, she wore men's clothes. Looking at the clothes in the closet, she pulled out a set and put it on. Chapter 29-27. Qin Chen slowly returned to the outer room and gently poured 2 cups of coffee. She picked up the expensive bone porcelain cup and took a sip. It was slightly bitter, but there was a familiar taste. There was another taste, which was the taste of heartache. She didn't notice that the door was opened. Lan Yu, whose whole body was bandaged, stood at the door and looked at Qin Chen in shock. She was wearing the clothes of the past, leaning against the office and drinking the brewed coffee. Her expression was exactly the same as before. Yes, exactly the same. Except for her long brown hair, which was also tied up at this time. Lan Yu looked at her in shock and couldn't move at all. Qin Chen smelled the coffee and suddenly looked up at Lan Yu at the door. She pursed her lips and smiled faintly. Mr. Lan was seriously injured, but he could still run so far. Her beautiful face was tilted and her expression was a little mocking. Are you here to reminisce? Lan Yu didn't move and kept looking at her. His expression was as if he was in a dream and he slowly walked over. When she didn't notice, he suddenly hugged her. The action was so fast that she couldn't react and the coffee in her hand spilled. Lan Yu. In a moment of desperation, she called his name. Lan Yu didn't seem to hear it and still locked her arms and body. He was so strong that he seemed to crush her. You're finally back. His face was buried in her neck and his voice was hoarse. Qin Chen struggled a little. Let go of me. At this time, Lan Yu also saw the pepper spray on the table and slowly became sober. Only then did he understand why she came to the hospital. He also knew who beat him up tonight. Anger rose, he carried her with one hand and walked straight forward. Qin Chen hit his shoulder and said angrily, What do you want, Lan Yu? He kept walking until he pressed her against the wall. His body was boiling hot against her, and his eyes seemed to contain fire. What do I want to do? He trapped her with his body and moved closer to her. I want to see what it feels like to be someone else's wife, or to see what's different about you now that you're a woman. Qin Chen was stunned. He actually wanted to. She struggled fiercely, but he held her in place, kissing her recklessly. He was as rude as a wounded animal. After realizing her intentions, he took the pepper spray she had brought and sneered, This can't save you either. He rudely lifted her little face. Mrs. Rome, shouldn't you pay the price for beating me up like this? He forced her to look at him, and his voice was so cold that ice could be shaken off. You know very well that it's not difficult to find out who is behind this. I can sue you until you spend the rest of your life in prison. Qin Chen raised his head. Sue. President Lan can also sue me for harassment, isn't that better? Lan Yu looked up and stared at her angrily. He sneered, Then I might as well make it true. He held her delicate chin and said word by word, You can sue me for rape. With that, he moved closer to her and whispered in her ear, Because I'm going to have sex with you soon. Qin Chen's eyes widened. He said sarcastically, I seem to like you better in men's clothes than in women's clothes, because it's more satisfying. His words were clearly insincere, and he was just trying to deceive himself. Chapter 29-28. His words were clearly insincere, and he was just trying to deceive himself. He had been so shocked when he first saw her at the airport. Qin Chen raised his knee. As Lan Yu screamed in pain, she looked at him coldly. How about this? Does it feel good? She thought that he would let go of her in pain, but he didn't. No matter how painful it was, he still held on to her. Cold sweat dripped down from his forehead, drenching his hospital gown in an instant, making his wounds even more uncomfortable. She could naturally feel that he was powerless. No man could recover after such a blow. Qin Chen wouldn't show any mercy to a pervert like him. Lan Yu endured the pain and a cold smile appeared on his face. Under her shocked gaze, his palm undid her hand with astonishing dexterity. This was the most humiliating moment for Qin Chen. This man actually treated her like this. This man actually dared to treat her like this. He clearly couldn't take it anymore, but he still wanted to take advantage of her. And didn't his wounds hurt? It hurt, it hurt a lot. She hadn't had a man for a few years, and now he was so rude. This was not some little game between lovers, but a kind of humiliating torture. He was almost ruthlessly teasing her, treating her. Qin Chen was in pain and a little confused. In her memory, there had never been such a thing. She didn't even remember having sex with Rong Lei. This was the first time she had been tortured by a man's fingers. And it was in her office, and the man was covered in wounds. There were some unspeakable parts that couldn't be touched. How shameless and thick-skinned did he have to be to dare treat her like this? Qin Chen was furious, and her body was covered in sweat. She couldn't vent, and he came over and asked her shamelessly, "Does it feel good?" She bit his neck right away, right at the artery. When that artery was bitten, it made people feel like they were on the verge of death, and Lan Yu was no exception. But he didn't feel fear. Instead, he treated her even more viciously. He stared at her and said hoarsely, "It's best if we both die here. Qin Chen, if you bite me to death, I dare to kill you. Do you want to have a try, huh?" Qin Chen stared back at him, his skin trembling. Finally, she relented and gnashed her teeth. "You lunatic." She let go, but he wouldn't. "I'm crazy, can't you feel it?" His voice was hoarse and hoarse. "Yes, you are a person who has forgotten the past. How can you feel that you have a heart?" It was as if he had gone mad. After tossing and turning like this, he actually caused trouble again. After the pain subsided, he felt that he had finally taken her in the midst of her violent struggle. However, 2 seconds, everything was calm. The atmosphere that had calmed down was delicate and embarrassing. As a man who had just had sex with a woman, 2 seconds was not a number that she could be unyielding about. Moreover, he had forced her to do it. He leaned against the side of her neck and panted slightly. Qin Chen lowered her head and looked at him. She sneered, "Mr. Lan, you better take some medicine before you rape me next time. Otherwise, you'll humiliate yourself and it won't look good on your face." Lan Yu raised his head slightly, his gaze fixed on her. The meaning behind it was a little outrageous. Chapter 29. Lan Yu's face looked terrible. As a man, he was despised to this extent. Moreover, it was the woman he hated. But what he hated more was himself. He hated her, but at the same time, he desired her. He couldn't help it, and he was angry. Qin Chen had already tidied up his clothes and walked 2 steps. It seemed that he was going to get a cup of coffee. Lan Yu didn't know where the courage came from, but he hugged her from behind. The huge momentum made them stumble until they reached the desk. "I'll let you know if it's 10 seconds. His face was close to her neck, and his voice was low and husky. His hot breath blew on the side of her neck, arousing her passion. Qin Chen bit her lip. "If you dare to touch me again, I'll call the police." "Call the police. Let others see how the high and mighty Dr. Qin is held in the arms of a man, and how she makes love to a man." He pressed his face against hers. "I heard that Miss Qin has a cold and light sex life now. How can a cold and light sex life give birth to a child, huh?" After he said that, he showed her that he only had 10 seconds. In the end, it was 2 hours. It wasn't that it didn't end, but he continued almost as soon as it ended, without any rest in between. After his bitter repression was released, he hugged her crazily and came again and again. And he just hugged her like that, and he didn't even have the mood to change. It wasn't that Qin Chen didn't resist. Firstly, there was the difference in strength between a man and a woman, and secondly, he was hugging her from behind, so she couldn't exert any strength. Just like that, the love that seemed to be gnawing on his bones and blood continued. The man and the woman didn't speak, as if they would break this shameful and unspeakable scene if they spoke. Until the end. He was still hugging her. His sweat was cold, but his heart was still beating very fast. Qin Chen's voice was unbelievably hoarse. "Can you let go of me now?" Lan Yu closed his eyes slightly and didn't speak. He just felt that bone-chilling feeling again. In the end, he still let go of her. Qin Chen held onto the desk and slowly walked to the sofa to sit down. He straightened his clothes. At this moment, her beautiful brown curls were loose, and her face was flushed red. She was especially seductive. Lan Yu has never seen her like this. This is a huge temptation for all men. Qin Chen's forehead was still dripping with sweat. His breathing was slightly chaotic, but his voice was very cold. "Is Mr. Lan satisfied? If so, you can get lost." Lan Yu also tidied up his clothes and slowly walked over. He leaned over and placed his hands on both sides of her body. His deep eyes gazed at her as he asked word by word, "Miss Qin, are you satisfied? If not, I can continue." As soon as he finished speaking, he received a slap on his face. He did not evade, nor did he intend to evade. He just took it head on. Not only was he not angry, but he also laughed in a low voice. Getting slapped, sleeping with someone else's wife is very fair. Qin Chen raised his head and took a photo of him with his phone. There were red marks on his neck that she had scratched when she was excited. They were extremely warm. She took a photo. This action didn't annoy him. Instead, she took out her phone. "Do you want to send it to Lu Wei? You don't have her WeChat, but I suggest you add her first." "Do you think I don't dare?" Qin Chen gritted his teeth. Chapter 29:30. He moved his face close to hers and sneered. "Tell her how it feels. After all, she hasn't tasted it for 10 seconds. Qin Chen was so angry that she snatched his phone away and threw it at the wall. With a bang, the phone broke into pieces. Lan Yu remained unmoved as he looked at her. His smile became even colder. His fingers gently caressed her lips as he muttered, "Your mouth is just as venomous as before, but your temper has become much worse." Qin Chen slapped his hand away. "Get lost. You're not going to text Lu Wei anymore." He raised his head and chuckled. He pinched her chin. "It feels good to do it with you. Did you make Rong Lei feel good too, huh?" This time, she was completely infuriated. She had a coffee mug in her hand, and she threw it straight at him. Blood oozed out of Lan Yu's forehead. But he didn't care. He looked at her in the red mist, at the woman he used to love. In the mist, he seemed to see her in the past, his past self. He fainted. Before he fainted, he didn't know that he called out, "Chin Chin." Half an hour later, Lan Yu was sent back to the ward. His attending doctor was busy stitching up the wound on his forehead. He didn't dare to say anything to the murderer. Qin Chen looked at Lan Yu, who had fainted. His face was pale and his expression was gloomy. She had never seen a person so gloomy even when he was asleep. She tilted her head and asked the doctor, "Will he be okay?" The attending doctor's gaze was meaningful. "Of course, there won't be a problem with the injury on his body, but I don't know about the injury on his heart." Qin Chen glanced at him and said, "Just keep him alive." With that, he turned and left. The attending doctor and the nurse looked at each other. Dr. Qin was still the same Dr. Qin. He was cold as hell. Lan Yu should be glad that Qin Chen didn't have a doctor now. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know how he died. Just like what Qin Chen had said, it was enough as long as he was alive. Vegetative patients were still alive. The attending physician wiped his sweat and continued suturing. In the parking lot of the hospital, Qin Chen sat in the car and quietly looked at the dark night outside. At this moment, she was sure that she and Lan Yu had sex before. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to find a way to make her happy so precisely today. He was astonishingly familiar with her body, and though she resisted, they were shamefully in tune in that respect. She leaned back against the seat and opened the window to calm herself down. Tonight's events had exceeded her expectations. She must forget that she did not want to be involved with a man, even if this man and she had what. She would never forget that his girlfriend was Lu Wei, and they were almost engaged tonight. Scum. In the end, Qin Chen came to a conclusion and started the car to leave the parking lot. Before returning to the apartment, she went to a pharmacy to buy a 24-hour contraceptive pill. When she was done, the female shop assistant seemed to be talking to herself. "Miss, don't worry. The medicine here is all real now. There are no fakes." The previous boss was heartless and specialized in selling fake medicine, especially this medicine. "If you want to eat it without any effect, how many more children will you have?" Qin Chen frowned. The previous medicine was fake. Chapter 29:31. Qin Chen wasn't interested in gossip, but at that moment, she felt that it wasn't a bad idea to listen. Thus, she bought a bottle of water and drank it with the medicine. The shop assistant smiled and said, "Let me tell you. One day, a man came to buy this medicine. It just so happened that the medicine was fake. That's why I wanted to tell you. But he bought it for a man to eat." The shop assistant's expression was one of speechlessness. "I really don't know why two men would take medicine after doing that kind of thing. Just thinking about it makes me sick." Qin Chen also felt that it was a fantasy and smiled. The shop assistant's face was full of longing. "But, that man was really handsome. He was the most handsome man I've ever seen. Unfortunately, he was a little girl." As she said that, she looked at Qin Chen. "Ah, you don't say. Miss, you look very similar to that beautiful man." The shop assistant kept sizing her up as if she wanted to see clearly. Qin Chen's lips curled into a cold smile. "You're wrong." After saying that, she left straight away. The shop assistant stared at her back for a long time. Suddenly, she slapped her thigh. "This cold aura, it seems to be her. This was the one who took the contraceptive pill back then. Did she accidentally leave behind a child?" The shop assistant looked at her. She didn't have the courage to ask, unless she was courting death. Qin Chen got into the car and immediately started it. She drove very fast, and there was a hint of coldness on her face. What the hell, why was there Lan Yu everywhere? Lan Yu seemed to be everywhere in this city. Qin Chen didn't return to the apartment immediately. Instead, she circled around the city and went for a run. She bought breakfast and newspapers and prepared to go back. After sweating all over, she felt much better. However, she didn't expect that the entertainment headline of this morning's newspaper would be her. She appeared in the same frame as Lan Yu in Zhao Yan's restaurant, including the dim corridor, her appearance in the hospital, and the scene of Lan Yu appearing at her office door. The last picture was of her buying medicine at the pharmacy in the middle of the night. A certain unscrupulous person even enlarged the medicine box in her hand again and again, and the words of a certain brand of morning-after medicine could be clearly seen. Qin Chen took a sip of her drink, tore the newspaper in half and threw it into the trash can. She didn't care about this matter. Anyway, a certain man would wipe his ass clean. Just as she expected. The one who had the biggest reaction about her and Lan Yu spending the night together was none other than Lu Wei. Early in the morning, Lu Wei went to the hospital, not to comfort, but to question. Lan Yu was seriously injured, but after learning the gossip early in the morning, he still spent a lot of money to suppress the news about Qin Chen. He had just finished his work and wanted to take a rest when Lu Wei came. Lu Wei brought a bouquet of lilies and found a vase to nourish them. Lan Yu furrowed his eyebrows and sneezed. He pointed at the flower and frowned. Take it away. Take it away. Lu Wei was stunned for a moment before she took it away. However, Lan Yu's wounds opened again, on his head and body. The attending doctor was busy for a while. Of course, he looked at Lu Wei with a meaningful gaze. Was he here to settle the score this early in the morning? The doctor was very black-bellied. He felt that the conflict between the couple wasn't deep enough, so he coughed lightly. Mr. Lan, you can't do any more strenuous exercises. Even if it's a married couple, you have to control your time. Limit it to less than 10 minutes. 2 hours or something, it's better to avoid it in the end. Married couple life. 10 minutes. Chapter 29-32. Did the doctor mean that Lan Yu had done it with Qin Chen for 2 hours last night? To her, this was simply an insult. Lu Wei was so angry that her face turned pale. She tried her best to control her emotions and said to the doctor, "Please go out for a while. I have something to talk to Mr. Lan." The doctor smiled mysteriously. Okay. With that, he took the nurse away, leaving the fiancé behind. Lu Wei didn't make things difficult for him immediately. Instead, she sat quietly, peeled an apple, and carefully cut it into pieces for Lan Yu. Lan Yu thanked her and ate in silence. Lu Wei looked at him and said slowly, "Lan Yu, you didn't refuse. Does that mean you haven't decided who to choose?" Choose? Lan Yu looked at her. Aren't you thinking too much? As a woman, Lu Wei had been holding it in for a long time. At this moment, she finally exploded. Don't you know whether I'm thinking too much or not? Lan Yu, you did it with her last night, didn't you? Lu Wei restrained herself, but her voice was still trembling. 2 hours, right? Lan Yu put down the apple in his hand and looked at her silently. Are you questioning me now? If I say yes, you're going to tell us to forget about it, right? His voice was very soft and calm. But in Lu Wei's heart, he knew very well that in such a calm moment, he had already regained control. In fact, it wasn't her decision, but he had decided to break up. It was Qin Chen who had appeared, and he didn't want to be with her anymore. Lu Wei looked down and smiled. Lan Yu, are you really so heartless? Or are you so infatuated with her that you can't extricate yourself? He frowned. Lu Wei stood up, and her bohemian dress fell to the ground. Whatever she can give you, I can give you. He stared at her, not at her body, but at her eyes. After looking at her for a long time, he said softly, I did do it with her last night, and I didn't even take a shower after we finished. I forced her. She can also sue me. If there are surveillance cameras in her office, I'm probably in jail right now. He stated it quietly, as if he was stating a fact. However, Lu Wei felt that he was saying how much he loved Qin Chen and was willing to do anything crazy for Qin Chen. She was embarrassed. He still admitted it, and he was the one who forced it. Lu Wei's throat was choked with sobs. She grabbed her clothes and covered her body, sobbing silently. She had never cried like this before, for a man. She stood in front of him like this, but he was indifferent. Lan Yu looked at her and finally sighed. He slowly got up and walked towards her. At this moment, the door opened. Lu Wei also happened to see the person at the door. The dress in her hand slipped down, then she reached out to hug Lan Yu, and suddenly kissed his lips. Qin Chen stood at the door and looked at the lovey-dovey scene in the ward. He smiled faintly and leaned against the door. It seems that I was worried for nothing. I wanted to explain to Miss Lu, but now it seems that there is no need. Lan Yu's body stiffened. He couldn't see Qin Chen, but he could imagine the expression on her face when she said this. It must be full of mockery. His voice was very low. Did you do this on purpose, Lu Wei? Lu Wei raised her head, and her eyes were watery. Lan Yu, I don't want to lose you. Lan Yu's voice was slightly cold. Really? Then prove it to me. Qin Chen leaned against the door and raised his hand. Two nurses came over. Chapter 29:33. The blue veins on Lan Yu's forehead bulged. Qin Chen pursed his lips and smiled mockingly. Turning love into a prank. Miss Liu, if I were a man like you, I would stay away from you as far as I can. A man who cheats on a woman, why should she keep him for the new year? When he said that, the nurse next to him really wanted to clap her hands. Dr. Qin, well said. However, looking at Lan Yu's dark face, she still didn't dare to clap. After saying that, Qin Chen left directly. The nurse also left, looking at Lan Yu with regret. She really wanted to say to him, you don't deserve this woman at all. Qin Chen went straight out, took the elevator to the first floor, and met Huang Xia on the first floor. She only remembered that Huang Xia was a distant cousin, but she didn't remember when Huang Xia's leg became a crutch. Qin Chen stared at Huang Xia for a long time. And such a gaze undoubtedly hurt Huang Xia. She said in an almost sharp voice, Qin Chen, you still have the face to come back. Qin Chen looked at the woman in front of him who was almost hysterical. Huang Xia had changed a lot. In Qin Chen's impression, Huang Xia had always been quiet, educated and polite, very like a teacher. They hadn't seen each other for a few years. How could she become like this now? Just when Qin Chen was in a daze, Huang Xia gritted her teeth. Qin Chen, if it weren't for you, how could I become like this? If it weren't for you and Lan Yu, I would have been Mrs. Lan long ago. Qin Chen closed his eyes slightly. It's Lan Yu again. The little sympathy for Huang Xia just now was gone. Qin Chen sneered. Shouldn't you ask yourself what you become? Can others change you? After that, she left directly, showing her usual coldness. Huang Xia turned around and looked at Qin Chen's back. Needless to say, her brown hair was very beautiful, and her figure also had the gentleness of a woman. These were all things that Huang Xia didn't have, or rather, lost. She shouted at Qin Chen's back, Qin Chen, so what if you've had it before? He's not yours now. Qin Chen paused and slowly turned around. She saw not only Huang Xia, but also Lan Yu. Lan Yu must have been accompanied by Lu Wei to the first floor, and he happened to be standing behind Huang Xia. Qin Chen looked in their direction and said in a low voice, I've never wanted it either. It doesn't matter if I get it or not. After she finished speaking, she left without looking back. Huang Xia gritted her teeth, but when she turned around, she saw Lan Yu and Lu Wei standing side by side. Lu Wei looked at Huang Xia's expression as though she was looking at a lowly creature. She had heard of Huang Xia's affairs. She was just a woman who wouldn't let go of Lan Yu, and she had never paid any attention to Huang Xia. Lu Wei supported Lan Yu and said in a low voice, let's go for the examination. Lan Yu did not say anything and left with her. As for Huang Xia, she stood where she was, feeling empty all around her. Her entire body was cold, especially where she had lost a leg, which was aching faintly. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Why? Why did Lan Yu have to be with another woman? Why did Qin Chen have to come back? Isn't it good that we're not happy together? Huang Xia's entire body was trembling, and it was an abnormal trembling. On the other side, Lu Wei supported Lan Yu and helped him with the examination silently. His body was severely injured, and it was Qin Chen who had gotten someone to beat him up. Even so, he still pressed down on Qin Chen for 2 hours. What kind of love and hate was that? Chapter 29-34. Lu Wei would rather Lan Yu's feelings for Qin Chen were mixed with hatred. Otherwise, she would be even more afraid that Lan Yu would leave her at any time. While Lan Yu sat there waiting, Lu Wei's fingers gently stroked his forehead and asked softly, "Did she do it herself?" Lan Yu didn't answer directly. Instead, he gently took Lu Wei's hand and said calmly, "Lu Wei, don't force yourself. Don't let yourself suffer." As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Wei started crying. She restrained herself and suppressed her voice. "How am I inferior to her? Lan Yu, tell me. There's nothing inferior about it. She's not worse than her, and her temper is many times better than hers. She rarely cries, especially when I'm wrong. She'll either hit me or just walk away. She doesn't care about feelings." Lan Yu sighed. "So, Lu Wei, you shouldn't like someone who's good. Feelings are hard to explain. If he could let go back then, he would have been with Huang Xia." Lu Wei looked down and held his hand. "Do you still love her?" "Love?" Lan Yu shook his head. "I don't love her anymore, but I might still hate her." He could let go of someone he loved, but he might not be able to let go of someone he hated. At this moment, he was willing to let go of Lu Wei. He was someone who lived in the dark. He alone was enough, and he didn't want to drag anyone else into it. He also tried his best to get along with Lu Wei. There was a time when he thought that he would propose to Lu Wei. But that night, when Lu Wei took out the rings, he knew how much he had pushed himself. He thought that he wasn't ready yet. He just didn't like her enough. However, he was so madly infatuated with Qin Chen's body that the moment he took possession of Qin Chen, he felt that his life was over. He knew that it was poison, but he still got infected again. Lan Yu lowered his voice. "Lu Wei, don't waste any more time on me." He looked into the distance and laughed self-deprecatingly. A person whose heart is filled with hatred will never be able to find happiness. Lu Wei was stunned. She looked at Lan Yu and slowly said, "Do you hate her? Then why did he still want to possess Qin Chen? Why did he still want to make love to her?" Lu Wei didn't understand and didn't want to give up. She had worked so hard to manage her relationship with Lan Yu. She had never dared to force him or make him feel any displeasure. However, when he said that he hated Qin Chen, he walked over to Qin Chen's side. No matter how badly Qin Chen treated him, he still couldn't let it go. Lu Wei squatted down and placed her face on Lan Yu's knee. She didn't say anything and just quietly hugged him, waiting for his heart to soften. Lan Yu looked down and closed his eyes slightly. "There is no happiness when you are with me." Lu Wei murmured, "Lan Yu, you don't have to love me, as long as I love you. As long as we are together, you will gradually forget her. Let's have a child. We can take the child and our parents on a trip every year." She raised her head and looked at him eagerly. "You can do it." Lan Yu looked at the woman in front of him and suddenly sighed. "Lu Wei, we are engaged. I mean, a public engagement party." Lu Wei was surprised and looked at Lan Yu in disbelief. She didn't see the disillusionment in Lan Yu's slightly closed eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he smiled gently. "We are engaged." Chapter 29-35. Lu Wei's eyes flashed with tears of joy as she nodded. Lan Yu didn't have any expression on his face. He just looked at Lu Wei, who was crying tears of joy. After a long time, he suddenly asked softly, "Lu Wei, do you love me?" Lu Wei was stunned and then said, "Of course I do." Lan Yu didn't say anything else. He was just thinking, if he loved her, why could he still endure these things? After the examination and confirming that there was nothing wrong with his skull, he went to rest. As for why he was so tired, he knew in his heart, and so did Lu Wei. It was just that he couldn't say it out loud. When Lu Wei left, she looked very happy. But when she reached the first floor, she stopped again. That Huang Xia was like a haunting ghost, still standing there. Lu Wei didn't want to talk to her and lower her style, so she went around and wanted to leave. Huang Xia suddenly opened her mouth and said in a low voice, "Do you think you've won?" Lu Wei stopped and looked at the woman in front of her. She chuckled and said, "In half a month, Lan Yu and I will be engaged. At that time, all the celebrities in City B will be able to witness it. But you may not have the chance to attend." Huang Xia smiled coldly, and her smile was very sinister and scary. Lu Wei stopped laughing. "What are you laughing at?" During the 6 months when she and Lan Yu were dating, she could often see this woman appear, which was very annoying. Huang Xia said very slowly, "Lu Wei, do you look down on me?" There was a hint of mockery in Lu Wei's eyes. Huang Xia laughed. "I used to be like you. I had everything and was also obsessed with Lan Yu. I was like you, thinking that I would be with Lan Yu, but it was all just an illusion." She raised her eyebrows and slowly walked forward until she was in front of Lu Wei. Her voice was rough. "As long as Qin Chen is here, don't think about being Mrs. Lan. Even if you are, as long as Qin Chen is willing, Lan Yu will sleep with you every night, not Mrs. Lan. Do you believe me?" Lu Wei's lips trembled. She wanted to refute, but she couldn't say a single word. "They slept last night. How long has it been since Qin Chen came back? How many times have they met?" Huang Xia laughed. Her smile was extremely ugly. At this moment, not only did she lose her legs, even her face was pale. She had given up on herself. Her eyes widened, and her yellow teeth formed a sharp contrast with Lu Wei's neat teeth. "I pity you." Huang Xia smiled coldly. "You're so full of yourself." With that, she supported herself with her walking stick and limped away. Lu Wei stood where she was and pursed her lips. She didn't believe what Huang Xia said. If Lan Yu loved Qin Chen that much, he wouldn't be with Lu Wei. At this moment, she did not realize that she could deceive herself and others, but Lan Yu could as well. Everyone who was injured would find another person to help them heal until their injuries were healed. Lu Wei didn't believe it, but she was still stubborn. She wanted to be engaged to Lan Yu, and she would even invite Qin Chen that day. Yes, she wanted to tell the whole world that she had Lan Yu. The news that Lu Wei and Lan Yu were about to be engaged caused a sensation in B City, and the news was accidentally released by Lu Wei on a program. Chapter 2936. Lan Yu turned off the TV and lay back down. He lit a cigarette and exhaled a long smoke ring after taking a puff. Guze sat beside him and exhaled smoke together. The nurse had come over and said that she couldn't do anything about them. Guze glanced at Lan Yu. "Are you really going to get engaged? You have to think about it carefully. You have a reputation now. If you go back on your word after getting engaged, it won't end well." He paused for a moment. Lu Wei and Qin Chen are both public figures now. The fashion industry is the same as the entertainment industry. Their fans are crazy. Why don't you think about it again? Seeing that Lan Yu didn't speak, Guze was really worried for him. You should at least say something. He nudged Lan Yu with his shoulder. Have you really forgotten about Qin Chen and started from the beginning? Lan Yu glanced at him and grunted. Then, he began to play with the lighter in his hand, looking absent-minded. Guzay smiled bitterly. You look like you don't want to talk about it. You weren't like this when you mentioned Qin Chen before. Lan Yu smiled. It's enough to love once in a person's life. How can there be so many feelings to squander? Guzay paused. I really sympathize with the future Mrs. Lan. Lan Yu glanced at him. You should sympathize with yourself. With that, he lifted the quilt and got up. Guzay looked at him. Where are you going? He hadn't been discharged yet. Lan Yu held a cigarette in one hand and buttoned his shirt with the other. He said calmly, there's a call from the sanatorium. I'm going to see Cece. Moreover, Mr. and Mrs. Lin were also back in B City. He had to meet them and go to a few places to greet them. He paused for a moment and was a little absent-minded. Guzay looked at his expression and said what he was thinking, you may not have such feelings for Lu Wei. In my opinion, you might as well marry Lin Cece instead of Lu Wei. At least Lin Cece won't bother you, and you can do whatever you want. You can also raise a few kids outside. Are you kidding me? Lan Yu sneered. With the Lin family's background, taking care of her has already attracted a lot of attention, and you still want to marry her. Not to mention Cece's current state, even if a fairy descended to Earth, Lan Yu would not have such thoughts. If you want to marry, then marry a woman who has nothing to do with you. Just like that time, when Huang Xia's leg was broken, he refused to marry her. She was Qin Chen's cousin. Why would he marry her? Saving it for the new year. As he spoke, he had already walked out. Guzay thought about it and decided to chase after him. I'll go with you. In the elevator, Lan Yu leaned against the elevator wall and looked at Guzay with deep eyes. How free are you? If you have nothing to do, find a woman and solve the problem of your Gu family. Don't follow me all the time. I can't find a wife for you even if you follow me. As he spoke, he said gloatingly, don't think about Qin Mu. Zhou Chongguang is doing well now. You probably won't have an affair and divorce until you die. Guzay's face suddenly turned ugly. He sneered, you have a better chance. Qin Chen's husband died. Why don't I see you doing it? I'm doing it. Lan Yu's voice was indifferent. If you have the ability, do it for me. This time, it was Guzay's turn to be dumbfounded. He did it. Was what the gossip said true? In the hospital, in Qin Chen's office, there was a lot of information. Guzay coughed lightly, then, are you still engaged to Lu Wei? Chapter 29:37. Guzay swallowed his words. They went to the suburbs together and came to the sanatorium. Mr. Lin and Mrs. Lin were there, but Lin Cece was obviously a little afraid of them. When she saw Lan Yu, she pounced over and hugged Lan Yu like a little animal seeing its mother. She buried her face in Lan Yu's arms and looked at Guzay carefully, as if a strange man had invaded her territory. Guzay smiled and stayed by her side. Among the girls, Lin Cece's appearance was considered top-notch. Madame Lin used to be the most beautiful woman in C City, and Lin Cece grew up in a honeypot, so naturally, she was more delicate. Even though she was so silly now, her natural delicacy couldn't be erased. Even Guzay couldn't bring himself to hate her. He glanced at Lan Yu, thinking about what he had said to him. In his opinion, Lin Cece was indeed much cuter than Lu Wei. How should he put it? Lu Wei looked perfect, but if she was too perfect, she would be no different from a vase. He looked at Lan Yu and Lin Cece together, and they were obviously much happier. As for Lu Wei, he was sorry, but he really didn't feel anything. Mr. and Mrs. Lin were a little uneasy when Lin Cece hugged Lan Yu like this, especially Mr. Lin. He coughed lightly. Cece. It's okay, Lan Yu said softly, then lowered his head and gently touched the little girl. She's used to playing with me. The Lin family's parents still felt that it was inappropriate, but Lin Cece leaned against Lan Yu with a sweet face. Mrs. Lin sighed and didn't say anything else. Lan Yu's hand touched Lin Cece gently. He hesitated for a moment and said to Mr. and Mrs. Lin, "I'll take Cece out to eat something." She had been locked up here for a long time and had almost never gone out. Actually, there was nothing wrong with her. She was very quiet and obedient. When Guzé heard this, he looked at Lan Yu sideways. Lan Yu looked at him. "Are you going?" Guzé nodded. "Of course. We're already here." Lan Yu didn't say anything and just brought his men away. In the car, other than the silly Lin Cece and Lan Yu, there was no one else. Only then did Guzé dare to say, "Are you sure that what you're doing now is the right thing to do? Don't forget that your Lu Wei is getting engaged in half a month." Lan Yu was focused on the road as he drove. He smiled and asked, "What's the problem?" Guzé looked at the little fool beside him meaningfully, but he didn't say anything else. The little fool, on the other hand, felt uneasy. She hadn't seen a stranger of the opposite sex for a few years. The appearance of a handsome and masculine man like Guzé was like a bolt of lightning to her. She was already scared to death sitting next to him, not to mention feeling that he had ill intentions towards her. Lin Cece was a little scared. She wanted to move to the front seat, but she was afraid that Lan Yu would be unhappy, so she could only sit in the back seat. However, she kept moving until she was at the furthest side, far away from Guzé. She only relaxed when she couldn't smell the man's scent anymore. Lan Yu looked at the rearview mirror and smiled. His gaze fell on Guzé for a while. Guzé was worried about him, but he was more worried about Guzé. Lan Yu heard that there was a type of fox that once it set its eyes on someone, it wouldn't leave even if it died. Chapter 29:38. Lan Yu chuckled as he drove the car to a famous Western restaurant in the city. There was a wide variety of food here, especially the desserts, which girls liked. He had bought them for Cece in the past, but he had always eaten them in her room and had never had the chance to take her out to eat. At this moment, Lin Cece was sitting in the high-class Western restaurant. She was a little timid and uneasy as she asked carefully, "Can I really order?" Lan Yu smiled. "Of course." Lin Cece bit her lip and looked at him. "But it looks very expensive." Lan Yu couldn't help but laugh. He lifted his body slightly and stroked Lin Cece's long black hair. "You still know that it's expensive." As he said this, he felt a little bitter. In the past, Lin Cece could get whatever she wanted. Not to mention a Western-style meal, it was a piece of cake for her to buy 10 restaurants. But now, she was asking him with such a naive expression if it was expensive. Lin Cece was a little relieved after seeing Lan Yu like this. Although she was a little silly, her English was very good. She recited the menu in English and even ordered an apéritif and dessert for herself. Lan Yu smiled. Guzé chuckled. "Lan Yu, can I order too?" Lan Yu looked at him as if he was looking at a pervert. Guzé chuckled. He took the menu and ordered in fluent English. When he closed the menu, he looked at Lin Cece with sparkling eyes. He smiled and said gently, "What's wrong?" Lin Cece bit her lip and didn't speak to him. Guzé smiled and didn't force her. The waiter left and soon brought over an apéritif and dessert. The two men sipped casually. At the same time, Lan Yu stopped Lin Cece from drinking. He was sure that she wouldn't be able to control herself after drinking. Lin Cece looked at him. She was a little unhappy, but she still obeyed. Only then did Lan Yu shift his gaze away and speak to Guzé. In the past 2 years, Grand Hyatt and Guzé's companies had a lot of cooperation. Naturally, the two of them were familiar with each other and talked about a wide range of topics. Lin Cece didn't understand, nor did she want to understand. Not only did she eat her dessert, but she also secretly ate theirs. So before the main course was served, her little belly was already round. Then, the two men were still chatting, and she just watched from the side, pretending that she hadn't eaten. Anyway, she had already licked the plate clean, so no one would know. She could just pretend that the waiter had served an empty plate. When the waiter served the main course, Lan Yu and Guzé had just finished their conversation. When he looked down, he saw that the plate was empty. He looked at Lin Cece. Guzé did the same. His gaze was somewhat clear as he stared at her small face. Lin Cece's face was a little red. She lowered her head and whispered, "I don't know. I didn't eat it." He confessed without being pressed. Lan Yu was still staring at her. And only then did Guzé know why Lan Yu would take care of Lin Cece like that. Men like them were under a lot of pressure from work and had no fun to speak of. Having such a little fool by their side was a great way to relieve boredom. Especially since Lin Cece's looks were pleasing to the eye. He didn't think so in the past, but now that she had become a little fool, she was especially pleasing to the eye. However, Guzé also saw that Lin Cece's little finger was missing. He tried not to notice it, afraid that he would hurt the little fool's feelings. After looking at her for a long time, Lan Yu then reprimanded her in a low voice, "If you eat too much, you'll have an upset stomach. You'll be afraid to go to the toilet at night. What if you can't find a nurse?" It was very rare for him to reprimand her like this. Lin Cece was a little scared. Chapter 29:39. Guzé met her gaze and was a little surprised, but he quickly smiled. "Lan Yu, it's natural for girls to like to eat. Don't be so fierce. Look at her. She's about to cry from fright." Lan Yu looked at Guzé and raised his eyebrows. "If I don't care about her, who will care? Guzé, will you care?" Guzé almost agreed, but he swallowed his words in the end. Raising a little fool was like raising a pet. It was easy to get used to, but it was hard to get rid of. You could ignore other women, but if you didn't want a little fool, you would definitely soften your heart when she looked at you with tears in her eyes, and Guzé's heart had been cold for too long. Guzé didn't say a word. Lin Cece looked at him uneasily. She pursed her lips and asked softly, "Lan Yu, does he hate me?" Lan Yu looked at Guzé and smiled. "You can ask him." The little fool didn't dare to ask. She only dared to sneak glances at Guzé. Lan Yu gave Guzé a look, letting him experience it himself. Guzé restrained his expression and said to the little fool seriously, "I don't hate you." The little fool mustered up her courage. "So you don't like me?" What kind of logic was that? Guzé felt that any answer would be inappropriate. If he said she didn't like him, the little fool would probably cry. If he said she liked him, what would he do if the little fool stuck to him like she did to Lan Yu? So, he chose to remain silent. His silence still made the little fool unhappy. When Lin Cece was eating, she was obviously not as energetic as before. She kept her head down and didn't make a sound. Lan Yu looked at Guzé and gave him a look, asking him to coax the little girl. Guzé refused. He didn't want to be the second Lan Yu. But his refusal was useless because there was an uninvited guest in the restaurant. It was none other than Lan Yu's fiancée, Lu Wei. Moreover, Lu Wei was with her parents. If she came over, Lan Yu would have no reason to sit at this table. When he got up, Lin Cece tugged at his sleeve. If Lan Yu sat down now, it would be equivalent to giving up on Lu Wei. Lu Wei was very magnanimous. Call Cece along. She had always known about Lin Cece's existence, but she thought that Lin Cece staying in the sanatorium wouldn't affect her and Lan Yu, so she didn't take it to heart. But today, she saw Lan Yu bringing Lin Cece out for dinner. Although Guze was there, she still felt a sense of crisis. Guze could tell that she didn't invite Lin Cece out of kindness. Thus, he smiled faintly. Cece will be fine with me accompanying her. Lan Yu looked at him. He was sure that Guze was reliable, so he made up his mind and left. This was also good for Lin Cece. He didn't want Lu Wei to make things difficult for Cece in the future. The moment he left, Lin Cece was like a child who had lost her parents. She grabbed his clothes and wouldn't let go. Lu Wei's gaze was fixed on him, and her face was gentle. But it was normal to be jealous and unhappy about this kind of thing. This kind of gentleness seemed artificial. Guze didn't agree with Lan Yu's way of looking at her, but this was Lan Yu's choice, so he couldn't say anything. He just got up and gently pulled Lin Cece's hand away. I'll take you to another shop to eat dessert later, okay? Lin Cece looked at him and said softly, no. Lan Yu and Lu Wei heard it too. Chapter 2940. However, Guze had already pulled Lin Cece up and half forcefully took the little fool away. This time, Lan Yu was a little disappointed. The child ran away with another man. Lu Wei looked at him and smiled. It seems that Guze cares about Cece very much. Lan Yu, after we get married, can you let Guze take care of Cece? Lan Yu looked at her and walked with her to her parents' table. He said slowly, Guze will get married too. Who will take care of Cece then? Lu Wei stopped and looked at Lan Yu. She asked seriously, are you going to take care of her for the rest of her life? Lan Yu said calmly, yes. Lu Wei did not expect him to be so straightforward. She felt uncomfortable but did not dare to say anything. So she forced a smile and did not say anything else. Although it was over, she still felt a little upset. So it was hard for her to be happy even when they were eating together. Compared to the cold atmosphere here, Guze and the little fool's table was much livelier. Guze brought the little fool out. The car belonged to Lan Yu. He did not have a car on such a hot day. In the end, they had to take a taxi. After getting in the taxi, the little fool said softly, you can't afford a car. Guze's heart skipped a beat. He had tens of billions of yuan. How could he not afford a car? But he still teased the little fool, yes, I am very poor. So when we go to eat later, you have to order less and choose the cheapest food. Do you understand? He told her solemnly. He felt that it was very interesting. Lin Cece looked at him with her big eyes. After a while, she said softly, then I better go back. She was not willing to follow him and not be able to eat anything. Guze did not know whether to laugh or cry. He did not expect such an answer. The little fool was silly, but she actually had the thought of despising the poor and loving the rich. She was very open about it. He could not help but tease her. If Lan Yu was poor and had no money, would you still be willing to be taken care of by him? The little fool seemed to think for a while before saying softly, I would still be willing. I can earn my own money. You can take care of the baby. When she said this, her little face was full of smiles. She looked a little silly, but very beautiful. Guze was stunned for a moment. Then, he gently stroked her little head and softly said, little fool. He actually cherished such a little fool. He was also a little jealous of Lan Yu. He pressed her against his shoulder, not letting her move. The little fool's voice was very soft, are you taking advantage of me? Goose laughed. That's not how you take advantage of others. With that, he planted a kiss on her forehead. For such a little fool, he was willing to give her more love and care. Since she had already become like this, he would let her feel that this world was beautiful. Lin Cece rubbed her head and glared at him as she rubbed it hard. Goose gave a hollow laugh. Lon Yu didn't kiss you. He wouldn't. Lin Cece said with certainty. He said that he has someone he likes. With that, Goose was a little surprised. He had always felt that there was some warmth in Lon Yu taking care of Lin Cece. At the very least, he would hug her, and they might even have some sort of physical relationship. After all, Lin Cece had looked pretty good these few years. But they had not even kissed before. And Lin Cece did not seem to mind. Didn't she like Lon Yu? Could it be that he was wrong? Chapter 2941. Goose was thinking that Lin Cece didn't want to sit with him anymore and wanted to go back. In the end, she didn't dare to mention it because Goose scared her. But when they got out of the car, the little girl almost cried and looked at him with dissatisfaction. He actually brought her to the People's Square to see pigeons in the summer. Lin Cece was wearing a white dress and sat on the bench. She didn't say anything for a long time and just looked at the pigeons. She didn't know if they would taste good if they were roasted. Her world was very simple, it was Lon Yu and food. She didn't like men around her, stinky men, and they had no money. Goose sat next to her and handed her a bottle of purified water. Drink some. The little fool glanced at him and felt a little speechless. A man who couldn't even afford a cup of Häagen-Dazs. But she was really thirsty, so she took it. She couldn't open it, so she looked at Goose. Goose opened it for her and handed it back to her. Lin Cece drank the water, but her eyes still fell on the fat pigeons. After a while, she turned her head and asked, "Can you cook?" Goose was stunned for a moment. Yes. Lin Cece's expression was a little speechless. She still looked disgusted. I'm not full, and you don't have money. You catch 2 pigeons and bring them back. I want to eat roasted pigeons. As soon as she finished speaking, Goose almost spat out the water in his mouth. Cece. What did you say? The beautiful little fool opened a pair of black and white eyes and pointed at her belly. I'm hungry. Goose looked at her thin body and frowned. Are you hungry? He remembered that she ate a lot of food in the restaurant, which was enough for a man. While he was thinking, Lin Cece nodded. I'm not full. She looked at him. Just 2. I'll take them home and roast them. It won't cost you anything. She whispered, You don't have money either. Goose didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He looked at the pigeons and then at her. Look at how cute these little creatures are. It would be a pity to eat them. Lin Cece stared at him for a long time before saying, The steak you ate for lunch today was also an animal. Judging from his expression, she could tell that he was obviously looking for an excuse. Goose sighed softly. All right, I'll try my best to catch 2. Can I make a phone call first? With little animals to eat, Lin Cece was quite easy to talk to. Goose held the phone and rubbed her little head. Then, he walked away and called his assistant. Find me an 80 square meter apartment right now. I want it to be second-hand and decorated. Leave the key at the door within half an hour. Also, prepare some ingredients in the fridge, especially 2 pigeons, the kind with their feathers plucked clean. With that, he hung up the phone. The little fool ran over with 1 pigeon, 2 pigeons, 3 pigeons, 4 pigeons, 6 pigeons. Goose rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. He looked at her and furrowed his brows. How did you catch these pigeons? The pigeons in the people's square were all intelligent. There had never been one missing in the past few years. Yet, she had caught 6 pigeons in just 2 minutes. Everyone was watching. Guzé had never been so distressed before. He coughed lightly. Cece, I'll buy them for you, all right? The ones I buy are dead. These are alive and delicious. Lin Cece was a little fool who cared about quality. Chapter 2942. Really? She was clearly in disbelief. Only after Guzé's reassurance did she let go of 4 pigeons. She held on to the other 2 tightly, ready to pluck their feathers and roast them. Guzé had his face covered the entire way because there were people taking pictures of them with their phones. He was sure that the next day he would be famous and scouted. Compared to his uneasiness, Lin Cece was much more relaxed. She felt that these pigeons were ownerless and anyone could catch them. However, there were indeed many people who caught them, but no one had ever succeeded. She was the only one who caught 6 in one go. Just as she was feeling proud of herself, a little boy pointed at her hand and made a fuss. Mummy, look at that person's hand. He only has 4 fingers. Lin Cece shrank back immediately, almost dropping the pigeon in her hand. Guzé looked over and saw that her face was pale. Clearly, the little fool knew how to be sad after being poked at her sore spot. Guzé took the pigeon from her hand and looked at the little boy, his voice soft and cold. Apologize. The little boy made a face at him. I'm not apologizing. She's already missing a finger and she's not in her right mind. She's a fool. Guzé narrowed his eyes. Apologize. He went forward and lifted the little boy up by his collar. Or I'll throw you down. The little boy covered his face in fear, but the words that came out of his mouth were even worse. At that moment, the child's mother came over and shouted at Guzé in exasperation. Let go of my son. Who are you to be so lawless? Guzé looked at the woman and said coldly, I'll naturally let him go if he apologizes. The woman started to make a fuss. You look pretty normal. Why are you with a retard? Did my son say something wrong? She's a retard. Even if I hit her, she probably wouldn't retaliate. With that said, the burly woman rushed in front of Lin Cece and gave her a slap. Lin Cece's palm-sized face was immediately filled with 5 red marks and even half of it was swollen. Tears gathered in her eyes and wanted to fall, but she held them back. Her face hurt, but her heart hurt even more, as if it had been pierced by needles. She was missing a finger. She was mentally abnormal, but no one in the courtyard had ever said anything about her. They all said that Cece was very obedient and that Cece was normal. So she was abnormal. Lin Cece stood there in a daze, without any reaction. The burly woman was extremely pleased. Look, she's just a fool. She won't even budge when I hit her. At this time, Guzé gently put down the child in his hand and slowly walked to the woman's side. He handed the plump pigeons to Lin Cece. Take them well. We'll roast them tonight. He decided that if he didn't eat the ones in the fridge, he would eat these 2 for the little fool. Lin Cece took the things in his hands. She remained silent, but her body was trembling. Guzé looked at the woman and said coldly, she won't fight back, but I will. After that, he slapped the woman. He was a mature man. When he used enough strength, his strength was astonishing. Moreover, he had the intention to help the little fool vent her anger, so he used all of his strength. The burly woman was hit to the side, and her face instantly swelled up like a steamed bun. The woman howled, Is there still law in broad daylight? Is a man who hits a woman still a man? Guzé ignored her and left with the dumbfounded little fool. Chapter 29:43. However, the burly woman wasn't willing to give up. She dragged him to the police station. In the end, he really went there. He brought Lin Cece and the 2 plump pigeons with him. In the police station, the woman was extremely fierce. She claimed that she wanted to tear Guzé and the little fool apart. Of course, if this good-looking and respectable man was willing to serve her once, she could let him go. The woman was the wife of the leader of the police station, and she was in charge of this area. Therefore, she was very arrogant and had to give in to her no matter what. At this time, she was making a scene in the police station. Her leader's husband was outside with Xiao Qing and the others. He was having a good time when he received a call from his subordinate, saying that his sister-in-law had been bullied and was making a scene in the police station. Although the leader didn't like his wife, when he heard that his precious son had also been bullied, he pulled up his pants and kissed the little vixen. "Baby, be good. I'll be back in a while. Don't put on your clothes." After saying that, he rushed back to the police station. He wanted to support his wife, but he was stunned when he saw Guzé. He was tongue-tied for a long time before he squeezed out a voice. "President Gu, why are you here?" Then he slapped his head. "Oh my God, President Gu, it's you. This is really a case of the flood rushing against the Dragon King's temple, not recognizing family." Compared to his warmth, Guzé was cold for a long time. "Can we go now?" The leader said repeatedly. He allowed it, but his wife didn't. She said through her teeth, "How dare you let them go? One of my teeth was knocked loose." The woman was angry when she saw her man's cowardly look. Did the person in charge of a small company have to suck up to him like this? The leader was furious when he heard that. He looked back at his wife and slapped her. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough? Get the hell back home." The woman was stunned. When she came back to her senses, she saw that her husband's neck was full of red marks from the little vixen's scratches. She shouted, "Zhang Fugue! You ungrateful bastard! If it weren't for my father, would you be in your position today? How dare you fool around with women in broad daylight? I'll beat you to death." His sturdy body pounced towards Zhang Fugue, but he accidentally missed. His plump body fell to the ground, and that loose tooth completely fell out. Oh my God! A squeal like that of a pig being slaughtered rang out. Guzé walked out with Lin Cece. Lin Cece was still holding on to the 2 pigeons. Half an hour later, Guzé and Lin Cece appeared in front of an apartment that was neither old nor new. They took the stairs to the 5th floor. Lin Cece looked at the door and asked, "President Gu, you live here?" Guzé didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He realized that Lin Cece had forgotten everything, but she still had a good concept of money. To put it bluntly, whoever had milk was their mother. He took out a key from under the mattress, opened the door, and stepped aside to let her in first. The door opened, and Lin Cece saw a small apartment. It was not big, and the decorations were simple, but it was quite clean. There was also a smell of disinfectant in the air, like the smell of a hospital. Lin Cece shrank. Like a hospital. Guzé also smelled it. He frowned and handed the pigeons to her. "I'll get something." Chapter 29:44. He found a bottle of men's cologne and casually sprayed it on her face. Lin Cece was much more relaxed after that. Guzé placed the things down and guided her to the sofa to sit down. He then went to find a gauze and ice to help her apply it. She sat obediently, and he sat across from her, so close to her that their breaths were just inches apart. Does it still hurt? Guzé asked her softly and looked at her little face. Her face was very small, only the size of a palm, but her eyes were big and innocent. Especially her curly eyelashes, it made her look much smaller than other girls of her age. Guzé remembered that Lin Cece was already 20 years old 3 years ago. She was about 23 or 24 years old now, but she looked like she was in her 20s. He couldn't help but think that he was almost 35 years old, which was a round older than her. He smiled. No wonder he doted on this little fool. She was so cute. It turned out that he was so much older than her. He looked at her and she looked back at him. She pursed her lips. It doesn't hurt anymore. How can it not hurt when it's so swollen? He sighed and helped her more carefully, afraid that she would have bad memories. As he was busy, Lin Cece sized him up and asked after a while, "What do you mean by fooling around? Is fooling around with women the same as playing with women?" Guzé closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he thought to himself. She really knew how to ask questions. In the past, Lin Cece loved fooling around. But now, she was so silly that she didn't even know what fooling around was. Thus, he coughed lightly. Fooling around is an abnormal relationship without marriage as the prerequisite. Lin Cece raised her finger and made a very embarrassing gesture. However, her little face was calm. Is that so? Not getting married, male and female, is that so? Guzé's Adam's apple kept rolling. What kind of troublemaker did he find out? How was he supposed to answer such a question? He thought about it and nodded. Something like that. The little fool did not give him a chance to breathe. His gaze became even more intense. Then have you ever fooled around with a woman? Cough, cough. Guzé couldn't stop coughing, and tears were coming out of his eyes. He looked at the little fool with a complicated expression. He put down the ice cube in his hand and said firmly, "No." Lin Cece asked again, "Are you married?" "No." Guzé said very seriously. The little fool tilted his head and thought for a long time before looking at him doubtfully. "You're still a virgin." Puff. Guzé couldn't hold it in any longer and choked. The little fool's expression was somewhat disappointed. "Look, you're clearly lying. This is how men look when they lie." Guzé didn't know what to do with her, so he said softly, "Cece, it's not like that. Many things have two sides. Just because it's not like this doesn't mean it's definitely like that. Do you understand?" He said this in hopes that she would be able to avoid it. But the little fool was very stubborn. She only believed in one thing. That is that you fooled around with a woman before. To this, Guzé couldn't refute. He did have a woman before, and it was the kind of woman that he used to satisfy his physical needs. In the past 8 years, he kept his chastity for a certain woman. It wasn't until a long time after she remarried that he had another woman. He bought her from a brothel. He hadn't done it for a long time, so he didn't feel much about it. Chapter 29:45. But at this moment, Lin Cece, the little fool, was asking him like that, and he was actually a little embarrassed. She was just a little fool who didn't know anything, and he was actually embarrassed. Guzé let out a long breath. That's not fooling around. He thought for a long time before he came up with an appropriate description. That's a way to make everyone happy. The little fool looked at him. Is that kind of thing very happy? Guzé coughed lightly. It's all right. Right after he said that, the little fool climbed onto his lap and looked at him eagerly. I want to try. Guzé was stunned. Before he came back to his senses, the little fool had already hugged him and kissed his lips, his face, and his neck. She had seen it on TV. Fooling around was like this. Although Guzet was poor, he was good-looking, so Lin Cece was willing to give it a try with him. It was like that person on TV who would give money to a woman after having fun. Guzet probably didn't have any money to give. Although it was a pity, Lin Cece still asked carefully, "Will you give me money?" Being kissed like that, Guzet's blood was boiling. Being asked like that, it was like a bucket of cold water had been poured over him. What did this little fool think she was? He squinted his eyes and reached out to take her down and put her aside. He let out a breath with difficulty. No. The little fool seemed a little disappointed. She stared at him for a long time before trying her best to climb onto his body again. After Guzet took her down, she climbed up again and was very persistent. In the end, Guzet pressed on her shoulder and asked seriously, "Do you really want to try it?" If she had to go through all this, he would rather it be him and not someone else. The little fool nodded her head gently and looked at his handsome face. Guzet pursed his beautiful lips and said in a hoarse voice, "If I have to take off your dress, will you be willing?" Her answer was to do as he asked immediately. Her actions were extremely fast. Guzet let out a deep sigh. Without saying anything else, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Not the way a man treats a girl, but the way a man treats a woman. Fierce and wild. On one hand, he wanted to scare her so that she wouldn't dare to make such a request to a stranger again. She was already like this, and he was afraid that she would suffer. On the other hand, he hadn't done it with a woman for a long time. Even though he was doing it to scare her, he couldn't control his body and was still aroused. He hugged her and kissed her ferociously. His large palms also stirred up a storm without hesitation. That little fool who only wanted to be happy was frightened and began to struggle. No, she was extremely afraid. She was afraid that this kind of feeling would make her feel like she was being carried up high in the sky and unable to come down. There were also countless hands in her head. She was terrified. She didn't want him to touch her. She began to struggle and cry. Her tears blurred her little face, making her look very pitiful. Guzet only came back to his senses when she bit his neck. When he came back to his senses, he was shocked to realize that she had struggled for so long, but he had not let go of her. He always felt a little guilty in his heart, so he subconsciously coaxed her for a while. No matter how uncomfortable it was, he didn't continue. Perhaps it was because he had helped her to adjust her clothes. Perhaps it was because his embrace was very warm. Perhaps it was because he promised not to touch her again. Chapter 29:46. Guzet's heart was a little wet. As a man, he could feel that she was afraid of this sort of thing. It wasn't because she didn't have any memories of this sort of thing. Rather, it was because she must have had a bad experience, and that bad experience might have caused her to become like this. He closed his eyes slightly and hugged her petite body. He patted her back gently, comforting her silently. Slowly, she calmed down. However, she still hugged him, relying on him. This feeling of being needed was so damn intoxicating. Guzet didn't know if Lanyu felt the same way he did. However, in his heart, he could already feel that Lin Cece was a kind of poison. It was best for him to stay away from her. At this moment, she had calmed down. However, his body was still like that, and he desperately wanted to take care of it. Thus, he coaxed her to sit down while he went to the bathroom. Closing the bathroom door, he didn't rush to take care of it. Instead, he lit a cigarette and took a few puffs. When it didn't calm down, he pressed down on his belt. Just when everything was thrown into the air and he couldn't control it, the door was pulled open. The little fool stood at the door and looked at his hand quietly. Then, she looked at his face, which was contorted out of control. Guzé had always known that a man's emotional changes wouldn't look good. Thus, even if he was with a woman he didn't know before, he would always turn off the lights. That kind of all-out love was for the most intimate of lovers. He had never given it to any woman before. However, at this moment, the little fool saw that he was in a sorry state. He pursed his lips and said calmly, "Get out." He tried his best to be gentle. However, not only did the little fool not leave, she was still looking at him curiously. He thought that he was probably too gentle, or perhaps she was too silly. She was so scared that she was crying, but now, she had completely forgotten about it. "Get out," he said again. This time, his voice was a little strict. As expected, the little fool was startled. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she ran out as though she was hurt. The cigarette in Guzé's hand had already been extinguished. He lit it up and slowly finished his cigarette. However, he had been disturbed, so he didn't have that feeling anymore. After taking a shower, he put on his clothes and walked out. He thought that the little fool would cry, but she was already sitting on the sofa, looking at the TV with snacks from God knows where. Her little face was white and innocent. For a moment, Guzé did not know what to say. This kind of stupidity made his heart ache, but at the same time, he was a little envious. Perhaps others saw her as a little fool and thought that she was crazy. There was nothing wrong with her. But in her world, she was happy. Guzé suddenly understood why Lan Yu had been protecting her and keeping her safe. It was probably because of envy. Only those who were unhappy would be envious of her. Guzé suddenly remembered that he was not happy like this, right? He lowered his eyes and smiled faintly. He walked over and rubbed her head. "Do you want to see me roast pigeons?" The little fool tilted his head and looked at him, his eyes full of disapproval. "Pigeons are so cute, how can you eat them?" Guzé's face froze up. Instantly, he felt as though he was struck by lightning. She was the one who wanted to eat pigeons and even caught 6 of them at once. She was drooling in the public square, and now, she said that they were cute and could not be eaten. It was as though she was saying that he was cruel. He rubbed his forehead and smiled. What about the ones that she caught? Chapter 29:47. Feeling a little mischievous, he coughed out gently. "But I've already killed them." "Killed?" The little fool put down the snacks in her hands and looked at him with her big eyes. Then, she grabbed his arm and bit down. She bit down really hard. She was angry. Guzé let her bite him as he lowered his eyes. However, his heart was in turmoil. After spending time with her today, he felt that she was quite normal, just a little silly. But now, he knew that there was something wrong with her, and it was quite serious. His heart ached slightly as he reached out and stroked her long hair, saying softly, "I lied to you. They're still alive and well." His little fool didn't believe him, so he went to the kitchen to get 2 live ones for her to look at. As Lin Cece looked at them, her eyes sparkled as she smiled at him. It was a sweet smile. But to Guzé, it was bitter. He didn't know how to get along with her. He didn't know how to face her smiles or how to face her cries. Instinctively, he knew that he would have to pay a price for being with this little fool for a long time. And he didn't intend to tie his life to a little fool. Hence, he calmed down and cooked for her. After eating with her, he said that he would send her back. Even though Lin Cece was silly, her senses were extremely sharp. She could clearly tell a person's attitude towards her. The change in Guzé's attitude before and after had hurt her heart. Even though he didn't have money, she still wanted to force herself to be friends with him. But now, it was clear that he wasn't going to take her out to play. On the way back, she took a taxi and was even quieter than when she came. Her little face looked out of the window, not making a sound. Guzé gave her the cold shoulder for a long time and felt a little guilty. Hence, he said softly, "I'll buy you some snacks later." It was her favorite food, so it should make her happy. Lin Cece looked up and said with some disinterest, "Forget it. You don't even have money. Keep it and fool around for once." Guzé's face froze. He felt that he couldn't teach her these things anymore in the future. What if she became bad? What if she used her beauty to exchange for money in the future? Would those bad men bully her? As he thought of this, his heart ached even more. Momo patted his head. "I'll buy you food. I still have money." She still couldn't feel happy when he was so nice to her. Somehow, she could feel that this kindness was different from before. The little fool ignored him, and Guzé was not happy either. He did not say a word until he got out of the car at the sanatorium. Unexpectedly, Lan Yu arrived first and was talking to Mr. Lin and Mrs. Lin. Guzé had not seen them for a long time. Now that he looked at them carefully, he realized that they had changed a lot, especially Mr. Lin. He was no longer as high-spirited as he used to be. He sighed in his heart, then looked down at the unhappy little fool. "Your parents are here, go quickly, remember to greet them." Without realizing it, he had taken on the responsibility of teaching her. Lin Cece slowly ran over and called out to him listlessly. She still looked unhappy. Even towards Lan Yu, she was indifferent. Lan Yu knew her the best. Seeing her like this, he raised his head and looked at Guzé, who was not far away, and smiled. "Did you bully her?" "How would I dare to bully your little darling?" Guzé sighed softly. "I have something to ask you later." Chapter 29:48. He narrowed his eyes and thought about it. After a while, he smiled faintly. "I also have something to ask you." Both men had something on their minds, so they left together soon. When the car drove away, Guzé saw the little fool looking at his car for a long time. He made up his mind and forced himself to ignore it. He also thought that in the future, they wouldn't meet again. When he and Lan Yu drove back to the city, it was already night, so they went to a club and got a private room. The manager came over and asked carefully, "Boss Lan, do you need princess?" Lan Yu lit a cigarette skillfully, looked at Guzé and chuckled, "Boss Gu probably needs it." After saying that, his eyes became sharp. Guzé narrowed his eyes, "No need." The manager left uncomfortably and soon ordered all the dishes. Lan Yu and Guzé ate face to face and asked, "Did you take her to the square today?" Guzé frowned and put down the knife and fork in his hand. "Lan Yu, you followed me." Lan Yu went straight to the point, "I was concerned about Cece." "I didn't mean to follow you, Boss Gu." Guzé was a little dissatisfied with his strange tone, so he naturally lost his appetite. He threw down the napkin in his hand and sneered, "What else do you know?" Compared to him, Lan Yu seemed to have a better appetite. "You asked your assistant to prepare a second-hand apartment in the city, you told Cece that you didn't have money, and you took a taxi everywhere you went. Guzé, what are you planning? Do you want to cheat her body or her heart?" Boss Lan, you really know everything." Guzé smiled coldly, "Since you care so much, why don't you marry her? I treat her like a sister, so I won't do anything beastly." After Lan Yu finished speaking, he slowly stood up and grabbed Guzé's collar. His voice was cold and hoarse. "I'm telling you, Guzé, Cece is now a blank piece of paper. If you treat her well, she'll take it seriously. If you don't want her, don't touch her, and don't touch her body, understand? She's not someone that can be bought with money. Guze was still looking at Lan Yu. It seems that you treasure her very much. The wounds on the body can be treated, but the wounds on the heart are much more difficult. Lan Yu regained his composure. If you knew how she survived, you would know why I treated her like this. He looked up, his eyes dim. She was raped, and it wasn't just one man. She was pregnant, but I asked the doctor to abort her because I didn't know which man's child was, and I didn't know if the child was healthy or not. Guze, she might not be able to have a child. Cici can only be a sister like me, a little animal. She's not suitable to be anyone's lover, understand? After he finished speaking, Guze clenched his fists. Rape, pregnancy, abortion, although he had already guessed it, hearing Lan Yu say it out loud, it was a different experience. He closed his eyes slightly and said in a suppressed voice, I will. When he slowly opened his eyes, he said, I will stay away from her. Don't worry, I didn't really touch her. Lan Yu's expression softened a little. I believe you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such an attitude. After Lan Yu finished eating, he left first, while Guze sat in the dark room for a long time. His assistant gave him a call and asked him if he was going to rent the apartment for the long term. Chapter 2949. After hanging up the phone and smoking a cigarette, he dialed his assistant's number again. By that apartment. The assistant was tongue-tied. What was wrong with Mr. Gu? That medieval apartment was not worth investing in at all. However, his subordinates did not dare to question Mr. Gu's decision, so they immediately went to do as he said. In less than half an hour, the property ownership certificate was placed in front of Guze. Guze looked at it quietly for a long time. The assistant watched from the side, not daring to breathe loudly. Guze suddenly said, how about this, transfer the property ownership certificate to Lin Cici's name. Lin Cici. The assistant was confused. Was she Mr. Gu's new lover? Did Mr. Gu have a girlfriend? That couldn't be right. Mr. Gu's assets were tens of billions. If he had a girlfriend, he wouldn't be so stingy. He should at least get a Thompson villa. When did Mr. Gu become so stingy? Guze seemed to have thought of something. He called Lan Yu, but hung up after the call went through. What was he doing now? What was the point of him giving the apartment to Lin Cici? Lin Cici didn't need it at all. That silly girl had Lan Yu to take care of her. Why did she need Guze's small apartment? He wanted to leave her a memory, but she could not understand it at all. It was just his wishful thinking. Guze pursed his lips and said calmly, forget it. The assistant thought to himself, what's wrong with Mr. Gu today? Why does he look like a woman on her period? She didn't dare to say it out loud. She only dared to stand by quietly. About 10 minutes later, Guze looked up at the assistant and said calmly, you can go back first. The assistant heaved a sigh of relief and left early. Guze also got up. He took the keys and property ownership certificate and went to the apartment. The 2 lively pigeons had been released. There was only one left in the fridge. He took it out and roasted it for himself. When his stomach was a little full, Guze held his forehead and laughed. How did he end up becoming a fool when he met a little fool? He let out a long sigh, threw away the rest of the food, and got up to sleep on the sofa in the living room. At dawn. When he woke up, he suddenly realized that he hadn't slept so well in a long time. When he sat up, he rubbed his forehead and recalled Lan Yu's words. He knew that Lan Yu was reminding him that the little fool was not only stupid, but also had such an unbearable past. Did he want it? Did he want it? He told himself that he couldn't have it. Guzé felt that after this night, he should forget about the little fool. From that day onwards, when he met with Lan Yu, he never mentioned Lin Cece, nor did he deliberately think about her. It was as if he was slowly forgetting about her. 1 week later. Lan Yu listened to the secretary's report lazily. His secret, Kevin, was calmly reporting the focus of the next month's work. Suddenly, Lan Yu opened his eyes. What did you say? For our hotel's 20th anniversary, the Public Relations Department invited the recently popular Qin Chen, Kevin repeated. Lan Yu murmured the name softly, Qin Chen. Whose idea was it? It was Manager Hua, Kevin reported truthfully. Lan Yu didn't even think about it. Replace him. I don't care who it is, as long as it's not Qin Chen. Kevin was new and didn't know about the entanglement between Lan Yu and Qin Chen, so he pursed his lips. But Qin Chen is the most popular supermodel in the world. Lan Yu frowned. More popular than Lu Wei. Chapter 2950. Kevin smiled. That's hard to say. Lu Wei's ranking is indeed higher than Qin Chen's, but that's only temporary. Qin Chen's popularity is not something that Lu Wei can compare with. Lan Yu's brows furrowed even tighter. He kept looking at Kevin as if he was thinking about something. Kevin was also a thoughtful person, so he coughed lightly. Boss, choosing Qin Chen is not a mistake. Besides, your relationship with Miss Lu. Lan Yu suddenly realized that he looked at Qin Chen from a personal point of view, but he looked at Lu Wei from a business point of view. Thinking of this, he was a little stunned. At this moment, Kevin had already made the decision for the boss. Then we'll still invite Qin Chen. Lan Yu didn't come back to his senses. He nodded lightly. When he came back to his senses, Kevin had already left. Lan Yu realized what he had said, but it was too late to regret it. At this moment, Kevin had already gone out to send a press release to the Public Relations Department, saying that the Grand Hyatt Hotel had invited Qin Chen for the 20th anniversary party. Naturally, the Public Relations Department also sent out press releases. The mistake was that they had the intention to contact Qin Chen's wife, Sister Jerenquin, but Qin Chen did not agree to it, nor did he sign a contract. This was going to be difficult. Grand Hyatt and the public were celebrating. After the news spread, Qin Chen said lightly in an interview, I have no such intention. This light sentence was like a slap to Grand Hyatt's face. June Yu headquarters. The president's office. Lan Yu threw down a stack of newspapers and looked at Kevin. Can you explain? Kevin was scolded right to his face. He lowered his head. It's my dereliction of duty. Dereliction of duty. Lan Yu said coldly. Look at what's written here. Guess how much pain CEO Lan's face is in. Kevin, tell me how much pain my face is in right now. Kevin lowered his head even more. It's my fault. I'll make it up to you, Boss Lan. What do you have to make up for it? Lan Yu's eyes were full of mockery. Kevin was momentarily speechless. He had been squatting in front of Qin Chen's apartment for 3 days. He had begged several times, but Qin Chen had a heart of stone. However, the more cold-hearted he was, the more Kevin admired him. Lan Yu looked at Kevin's hopeless expression and said indifferently, Give me her number. Kevin's heart skipped a beat. It's probably for her agent. Even Sister Quan is easier to talk to than her. Lan Yu stared into his eyes. If Sister Quan is so nice, why didn't she manage to convince Qin Chen? Kevin didn't say anything. He just stood to the side with his eyes lowered, looking like a gay man in a gay man. Lan Yu frowned. When did you have such a hobby? After saying that, he stood up and said, "Give me the number before you get off work. Also, don't wear pink shirts in the future." Kevin adjusted his expression and then said, "Boss, don't you think Chin Chen is very aggressive?" Aggressive? Lon Yu made himself a cup of coffee. As he stirred it, he said indifferently, "She's straight." Straight? Kevin looked at his boss. Lon Yu suddenly had the desire to confide in someone. His expression was a little nostalgic. Very soft and soulful. Kevin yearned. "Boss, have you snuck up on her before?" Lon Yu paused for a moment, then smiled. "No, it's not. No, she was still a doctor. She was very strong. I was turned gay." Chapter 29:51. Kevin didn't understand, but he saw deep love in his boss's eyes. Love? The boss loved Chin Chen. And he still loves her. Just as Kevin was thinking, Lon Yu smiled again. "It's all in the past. There's nothing to miss." His mother passed away and he went to France. He gave his mother's jewelry to Chin Chen, but she threw it away. She chose Ronglei and chose power. She was now the largest shareholder of the largest biological group in France, and she was as rich as a country. Being a model was just a hobby. Lon Yu's gaze changed slightly. Kevin, on the other hand, looked at his boss and thought to himself, "This is the rhythm of love and hate." He quickly got a number and put it on Lon Yu's desk. When he was about to leave, he looked at his boss's coffee machine again. Kevin was familiar with these things, so he blurted out, "This coffee machine costs more than $1 million, right?" Although his boss was rich, he had never seen him so extravagant. Lon Yu lowered his head and murmured, surprised. "That's because you've never met someone who really knows how to enjoy things." Kevin looked at him. Lon Yu smiled slightly. "It's your goddess, Chin Chen." At that time, I called her Dr. Chin. Doctor, Kevin's heart skipped a beat. His boss liked the temptation of uniforms. But he didn't dare to say anything and quickly left. Lon Yu didn't look at his phone immediately. Instead, he stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the dusk outside. At this moment, he had everything, but he still felt lonely. He stood there until 8:00 at night. His secretary came to say goodbye to him, and he moved slightly. He looked at the young secretary and murmured, "Chen Chen." The little secretary, Meng Chen Chen, was stunned. The CEO was calling her by her nickname. The CEO was interested in her. She blushed and said, "CEO Lon, I have a boyfriend." Lon Yu came back to his senses and smiled faintly. His smile was a little bitter. "I'm sorry, I was wrong." After that, he muttered, "You can get off work first." Meng Chen Chen was still a little uneasy, but then she remembered what Kevin had said about Chin Chen. Could it be that the Chin Chen that CEO Lon was referring to was Miss Chin? The little secretary's face reddened even more. She was overthinking things. The door was closed again. Lon Yu suddenly covered his eyes. How much longer would it take for him to completely forget about her, or to treat her as if she didn't exist? She slowly walked to the desk and looked at the note with Chin Chen's phone number on it. She gently picked it up, took the landline, and dialed her number. Chin Chen picked it up quickly. There was a lot of noise on the other side. There were sounds of breathing and music. It sounded like the sound of a man and a woman in love. Lon Yu was stunned. He had thought of many possibilities of what she was doing, but he had never expected it to be like this. He hung up without a second thought. Her originally cold eyes were now filled with pain and sharpness. His eyes have been staring at the phone. But there was no sound. She must be too busy to pay attention to him. There was a fire in his heart, so he dialed again. This time, the phone rang for about 10 seconds before it was picked up. Qin Chen's voice was slightly panting, and her husky voice was very charming. "I'm Qin Chen." Lan Yu was stunned for a long time before he said mockingly, "Who has the honor to be Mrs. Rong's guest this time?" On the other side, Qin Chen frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about, Mr. Lan?" "I'm working out." Lan Yu's mood suddenly became extremely good, but also extremely angry and exasperated. Chapter 2952. Lan Yu was silent for a long time, and Qin Chen hung up the phone. She didn't care about him. She hated him. Even after she lost her memory, they had slept together once. No, he had forced her to do it with him once. She wasn't satisfied with him, his character and his skills. Obviously, she didn't take it to heart. Lan Yu secretly cursed in his heart. Was it because his skills were too bad? Or was it because he hadn't had sex with a woman for a long time, so he was rusty? He hung up the phone slowly, smoked 2 more cigarettes, and then walked out of the office. Of course, he scanned the slip of paper with her number on it. When he got into the car, Lu Wei called and asked him happily how the preparations for the anniversary were going. Lan Yu held the steering wheel with one hand and adjusted his tie with the other. It was prepared by Kevin. "I haven't asked him yet." Lu Wei hesitated for a moment before saying softly, "Lan Yu, are all men like this when they lie?" She had tried to say it as easily as possible, because she didn't want to quarrel with him. Lan Yu looked at the night outside and said calmly, "What do you want to say?" Lu Wei suppressed her anger and asked, "Why did you invite Qin Chen?" "That's the company's decision." Lan Yu said calmly, "Lu Wei, I want to have my own space at work, otherwise it will be difficult for us to continue our engagement." Lu Wei was silent for a while before she said in a low voice, "Is it because of me that you can say such words?" Lan Yu sighed, "Lu Wei, you're thinking too much." Lu Wei's voice became a little sharp, "If you care about my feelings, you should change your decision." Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and said, "Lu Wei, if I were so easily swayed, then Grand Hyatt wouldn't be where it is today." After that, he hung up the phone. It was difficult to communicate with an irrational woman. Compared with Lu Wei, he would rather face Qin Chen's ascetic face. Thinking of this, he remembered the sound of her breathing when she worked out, which couldn't be suppressed at all. Lan Yu looked at the dark night outside. His Adam's apple moved slightly before he started the car. He drove the car to Qin Chen's apartment and sat in the car, smoking slowly. When Qin Chen came back, he sat in Zhao Yan's car. Zhao Yan's wife was also in the car, but from Lan Yu's direction, he couldn't see her. What he saw was a man and a woman alone, and he immediately thought of the sound of panting. Qin Chen got out of the car. She saw Lan Yu, but she did not want to trouble Zhao Yan and his wife, so she said calmly, "Goodbye." Especially Zhao Yan's wife, she gave a special smile. After she got out of the car, Zhao Yan fixed his collar and said to his little wife with dissatisfaction, "Keep your saliva to yourself. Qin Chen is a woman." His little wife complained in a low voice, "But I still remember the Qin Chen from before." Mr. Zhao glanced at his wife and started the car. "Then in your eyes, am I still the same me?" His little wife pursed her lips and said, "You still are. You haven't changed at all. You're an old artist without a sense of humor." "Old artist?" Mr. Zhao expressed his dissatisfaction. He reached out to open his collar again and said in a low voice, "Then when we get home, I'll let you know if I'm an old artist or not." His little wife blushed. She was a woman with an orthodox education. She would blush for a long time if she said a few more words to her husband. Chapter 29:53. But today, her calling him an old artist had completely aroused the man's deep-rooted bad habits. He could not wait to go home, find an empty room, and bully his little wife until she cried so that she would take back what she said. Qin Chen stood in the dark and watched Zhao Yan's car drive away. Then, she slowly walked into the lobby. She did not care about the mad dog who was waiting there. However, before she entered the elevator, her hand was caught by someone. She turned her head and saw Lan Yu's angry face. "Are you so hungry that you can't be choosy? Didn't you say that you and Zhao Yan didn't have a script together?" Qin Chen turned his head slowly and looked at the mad dog who had followed her. He frowned and reached out his hand to gently pull Lan Yu down. Countless stars were spinning in front of him. Qin Chen looked down at him and kicked him. "It seems that the previous lesson did not make you behave, CEO Lan." Lan Yu said something in a low voice. Qin Chen kicked him a few more times and then stepped on him. When the shoe pressed against his chest, he let out a muffled groan. Qin Chen stepped into the elevator. Just as the elevator door was about to close, a hand suddenly reached in and grabbed her leg. Qin Chen was shocked. He squinted as if a zombie had come back to life. Lan Yu's movements were very fast, and he pounced on her. In an instant, she was pushed to the ground by him. Her arms and legs were twisted. Qin Chen frowned and looked at the man above him. "What does Mr. Lan want? I remember that Mr. Lan is getting engaged next week. Do you really want to be in the headlines again?" Lan Yu's gaze was deep and his large hand suddenly moved downwards. Qin Chen was stunned. Then, he struggled violently. "What do you want?" "Bastard, let go of me." But he did not let go. Instead, he carefully examined her, and finally found a hickey on her collar. Lan Yu was stunned. His expression was very ugly. "You let him touch you." Qin Chen was stunned and reached out to touch the place he touched. It was left by him last time. It was such a deep hickey that had yet to disappear. He actually had the nerve to say that she was indecent. It was already good enough that she didn't use this to send him to jail. So she said coldly, "Yes, I let him touch me. He's much better than you." The man was furious. How could he listen to such words? He didn't care what his purpose was. He held her face and kissed her. Qin Chen was furious. She raised her leg and kicked him. She kicked his knee, but then he reached out and pressed her leg down. "What if I break it? Will it make you comfortable?" he said nastily. Qin Chen sneered, "Boss Lan, you think too highly of yourself. Boss Lan's level can only make Miss Lu pretend to mock you." The veins on Lan Yu's forehead bulged as he glared at her. "I didn't have sex with her." Qin Chen's smile became even colder. "So, why are you staring at me, Mr. Lan? If you have eyes, go look for your fiancée. Or, I'll call her for you, She took out her phone and really made the call. It only rang once before he smashed it against the wall of the elevator. However, a phone rang outside the elevator. For Lan Yu, it was a rather familiar sound. Lan Yu turned around slowly. It was Lu Wei. Lu Wei held her phone and looked at the man and woman in the elevator in shock. It was obvious that Lan Yu had forced himself on them. Chapter 29:54. Lu Wei was stunned. She looked at the people in the elevator and kept retreating until there was no way to retreat. She pressed her back against the wall and looked at the two people in the elevator. Lan Yu, we're getting engaged, she said softly. You said that you would forget her. You hate her. You don't love her. After saying that, Lu Wei's face was already covered in tears. She looked at the man in front of her with pain in her eyes. Can all forgiveness be taken as indifference? She murmured and stared at them. Lan Yu lowered his head and looked at the woman under him. He slowly got up and said calmly, it was just an accident. Lu Wei's gaze landed on Qin Chen. Qin Chen's expression was even calmer than Lan Yu's. She stood in the elevator and said coldly, Mr. Lan, there won't be a next time. After saying that, she walked out. Before Lu Wei could come back to her senses, Qin Chen took the phone from her hand. She used her cell phone and dialed 110. 110. Someone is raping me here. Lu Wei was stunned. Then, she snatched the phone and glared at Qin Chen. Are you crazy? Compared to her hysteria, Qin Chen appeared to be much calmer. She pulled her clothes and leaned against the wall like an outsider. She looked at Lu Wei and smiled mockingly. What, you can't bear to part with me? Lu Wei narrowed her eyes and looked at her. Qin Chen, don't go too far. Qin Chen smiled even more mockingly. You think that I have an affair with Lan Yu. I want to sue him, but you don't want to. Lu Wei, tell me. As a fiancé, don't you feel pitiful to be so unconditionally humble? Qin Chen sneered. Don't be nervous. I'm dialing an empty number. Lu Wei bit her lip and was about to go crazy. It was an empty account. Qin Chen had tricked her. Qin Chen's gaze swept over Lan Yu, and his tone became even more indifferent. This time, it was an attempted rape. I still have to thank Miss Lu, but last time in the hospital, I left evidence. After saying that, she glanced at the couple, indicating that she didn't want to play with them anymore. Actually, sleeping with Lan Yu once was not a big deal. His skills were not bad, and she also enjoyed it. But a rape was a rape. She still kept the evidence. Maybe it would be useful one day. This was Qin Chen's little dark idea, and now he had successfully fooled Lu Wei. Lu Wei was embarrassed. She silently let Qin Chen leave. When Qin Chen stepped into the elevator, Lan Yu asked softly, Are you sure it's rape? Qin Chen narrowed his eyes. Did he think that dying in front of his fiancée was not enough? Then she would send him on his way. So, Qin Chen said softly, it was rape once. Later on, I took the initiative to cooperate with Boss Lan. Are you satisfied with this answer, Boss Lan and Miss Lu? Lan Yu's face darkened. Lu Wei's face was pale. Although she had long known about it, knowing it and hearing it from the female lead were two different things. Qin Chen looked at Lu Wei and smiled faintly. I really admire you for being able to endure such a man. Lu Wei desperately suppressed herself and said slowly, Qin Chen, I won't fall into your trap. Do you think that if I leave Lan Yu, he will want you? Qin Chen smiled lightly and ignored her. In the past, she had heard that Lu Wei was very independent and had quite a character. But now it seemed that she was just a poor woman who wanted to marry into a rich family. For Qin Chen, who had always been in a rich family, this kind of feeling could not be understood at all. Chapter 2955. Qin Chen stood in the elevator and pressed the close button. The elevator door slowly closed in front of Lu Wei and Lan Yu. Lan Yu's face was very ugly as he stared at the door for a long time. Lu Wei said quietly behind him, Lan Yu, should I reconsider our relationship? Lan Yu turned his head and looked even calmer than her. He said slowly, if that's what you want, then do as you please. Lu Wei's voice sounded a little hysterical. Am I not worth it for you to give up the past? Or is it because the person you're marrying is me, so you're not going to be loyal? Lan Yu's expression became colder. He didn't say yes, nor did he say no. He just lowered his head, lit a cigarette and walked out slowly. Lu Wei walked out and followed behind him. Lan Yu leaned against the car door and smoked quietly. He did not pay attention to her. Lu Wei was a little embarrassed. She had seen him with Qin Chen, but he hadn't explained. Her voice was a little shaky. Don't you care about me? Lan Yu stroked his forehead with his fingers and let out a long breath. Lu Wei, I think you're suitable for me, but you're going to do something that's not suitable for me. He looked at her and said, there won't be a next time. I won't have sex with her again. It wasn't for Lu Wei, but he couldn't accept being so infatuated with a woman he hated. He wanted to get rid of her more than anyone else. There was a touch of expectation in Lu Wei's eyes. Can you not invite her to the anniversary celebration? June, you can't afford to lose face. His voice was very soft, but his tone was very heavy. He was gentle to Lu Wei, but it didn't mean that he would tolerate her challenging his bottom line. Under her disappointed gaze, Lan Yu said, I can propose to you on that day. This was probably what women liked the most. He didn't mind making her happier so that she would be more loyal to him in the future. If a man couldn't marry the woman he loved, it would be hard for him to be loyal, but he still hoped that his wife would be loyal to him. Lu Wei looked at the handsome man in front of her in the dark night. Reason told her to reject him, but she couldn't resist such a temptation. She liked him and his power. She had longed to be Mrs. Blue for a long time. Moreover, she knew that apart from the accident with Qin Chen, he didn't have any other women. Lu Wei was still tolerant towards men from rich families. She could tolerate a man's playfulness, but she could not forgive a man's devotion to a woman, especially a woman who was not worse than her in all aspects. Qin Chen had become Lu Wei's imaginary enemy. She looked at Lan Yu and smiled gently. All right. I believe you. Lan Yu raised his eyes and looked at the apartment building. His heart was filled with mixed feelings. How could some people be forgotten so easily? Just like this penthouse. He had spent the best time with her in there, so how could it be erased so easily? There wouldn't be another woman in this life who could make him love and hate her so much. Lan Yu took the last puff of his cigarette and said to Lu Wei, let's go. I'll send you back. Lu Wei nodded, opened the door and sat in the driver's seat. He hadn't started the car yet. She silently buckled the seat belt and finally summoned up the courage to say, come to my place tonight, okay? Chapter 2956. Lu Wei's face was a little hot. It wasn't that she didn't have experience, but she hadn't done it for a long time after she got together with Lan Yu. She was a little nervous because she was the one who brought it up. She was afraid that he would reject her. As she waited with bated breath, Lan Yu nodded and started the car. He had driven her back a few times, so he knew where she lived. Lu Wei was quite a bourgeois woman, but compared to Qin Chen's extravagance, it wasn't worth mentioning. It was Lan Yu's first time entering her apartment. It wasn't big, about 90 square meters, unlike Qin Chen's 200 square meters. Moreover, Lu Wei's apartment was very warm, and Qin Chen was generous. Even a man wouldn't feel uncomfortable living there. Lan Yu didn't realize that he was subconsciously comparing, or finding an excuse to reminisce. He walked to the window, opened the curtains, and smoked quietly while looking out into the night. The night breeze caressed his face, making it a little hot. Lu Wei turned on the air conditioner and made a cup of coffee. She said softly, I heard from Kevin that you like coffee. Try mine. Lan Yu held a cigarette in one hand and the coffee in the other. He frowned after taking a sniff. What's wrong? Isn't it to your taste? Lu Wei said worriedly. Lan Yu's voice was a little light. No. I'm just used to making coffee, and it's not suitable for someone else to make it. Lu Wei also picked up a cup and sipped it lightly, filtering out the meaning in his words. Lan Yu probably didn't know what he really thought. It wasn't just coffee. It was just to adapt to his own life. He probably wanted to live alone. To him, she was just a springboard to get rid of the pain of the past. But she was willing to be this springboard. She was willing, so she fought for it. Lu Wei was extremely beautiful. When she returned home, she let down her long hair and put on her slippers, which made her look even more gentle. She looked at the man in front of her and was a little nervous. I don't know if you can wear the bathrobe here. Lan Yu tilted his head and thought for a moment. If it's not convenient, I'll go back. No. Lu Wei suddenly hugged him and pressed her face against his chest. She murmured, Lan Yu, it wasn't easy for us to get to this point. I don't want to let you go. She looked up at him. I want to be with you for real. We're engaged. We don't have to live together, but we can stay for a night once in a while, can't we? This is what a couple should be like. He looked at Lu Wei's anxious expression and listened to her words. In a trance, he felt that he had said these words himself. Who was he talking to? That heartless woman. Lan Yu's eyes were stained with a layer of gloominess. He pressed out the cigarette and said, Take a shower first. Lu Wei blushed. Aren't you coming? No. Lan Yu's voice was a little hoarse. I'll sleep on the sofa. He didn't intend to take a shower here. Since he didn't have a bathrobe, it was fine if it was inconvenient. He was planning to get engaged to Lu Wei, but he couldn't just do whatever he wanted to when it came to the physiology of men and women. Facing such a beautiful Lu Wei, he didn't have any urgent desires. He might even hug and kiss her, but he didn't want to. He didn't want to force himself to do it. Chapter 2957. Next time. He smiled and rubbed his neck. I'm a bit tired. Lu Wei wanted to say something, but she didn't. She still had the last bit of restraint as a woman. When a man told you he was tired and didn't want to do it, you couldn't force him to do it, right? She chose to be considerate. There was also the intentional or unintentional seduction. She nodded, got him a blanket and settled him down before going to the master bedroom to take a shower. When she came out, it was already 20 minutes later. Lu Wei came out in only a bathrobe and walked into the living room, wiping her wet hair. Lan Yu was reading the news on his phone. She squatted down beside him and murmured, What are you looking at, Lan Yu? Nothing. He calmly put away his phone and glanced at her. From his point of view, he could admire his beautiful fiancée's assets, but he calmly withdrew his gaze. Lu Wei put the towel aside, held his head in her hands, and kissed him lightly on the face. Lan Yu didn't reject her. It wasn't because he couldn't resist the temptation, but because their relationship couldn't. Lan Yu, I want you. Lu Wei's voice trembled as she kissed him. Then, she kissed his thin lips. It was the first time she had tasted it. His kiss was gentle, not rough, and he gently pulled her over and placed her on top of his body. The temperature of the man and woman merged. His shirt was unbuttoned, and her sexy pajamas slid down to her shoulders. The heat was ignited. Lan Yu turned around and trapped the woman under him. He could have it if he wanted. She was his fiancée anyway. He wouldn't be a man if he didn't feel anything when such a woman was lying under him. His movements became wild, almost frantic as he bit her neck. Lu Wei was naturally aroused. However, as Lan Yu kissed her, he stopped. Then, his expression became indescribably strange. Lu Wei wasn't a little girl anymore, and she realized why he didn't continue. They had been hugging and nibbling for a long time, but he didn't have any reaction at all. Lu Wei felt a little hurt. She was one of the top 5 supermodels in the world. She had a good figure and a pretty face, but he actually couldn't get over her. She was in a daze, and her clothes were still messy. Lan Yu adjusted her clothes slowly and said hoarsely, "Next time." As a considerate fiancé, no matter if your man is really incapable or pretending to be incapable, you have to find a reason for him. Lu Wei said in a low voice, "Lan Yu, you're too tired." She pretended not to care and pressed him to lie down. "I'm going to make you a midnight snack. You probably haven't had dinner yet." Lan Yu suddenly asked, "Is there seafood here?" Lu Wei was taken aback. After a moment, she said in a low voice, "Yes, but it's dry goods. Let me make a portion of paella for you." Lan Yu smiled. Lu Wei looked at his face. She had never seen him smile so sincerely, so she suppressed the fact that she was allergic to seafood and squeezed out a smile. "Okay, I haven't eaten anything you cook." Lan Yu got up and went to the kitchen to take out the ingredients. He could tell at a glance that Lu Wei was the kind of woman who didn't know how to cook. Men would come here and pretend that they often went to the kitchen, but she actually didn't know how to cook. However, he didn't care too much because Qin Chen didn't know how to cook either. Lan Yu was cutting the shreds, lost in thought, and his fingers started to bleed. Lu Wei exclaimed, "Don't move, I'll bandage it for you." She said it was bandaging, but she put her finger in her mouth and gently sucked. She was tall and docile, and at that moment, she actually looked like a person. It was late at night again. Lan Yu's voice was a little hoarse. "Chen Chen." Chapter 2958. Lu Wei's movements slowed down, and she stared at him with a deep gaze. She let go of his fingers and said absent-mindedly, "Lan Yu, you called the wrong person just now. Do you know that?" Lan Yu came back to his senses. He stared at the woman in front of him. Just now, he had tried to take off her clothes and fight with her, and he had failed. He said that he was too tired, and she was understanding. But only he knew that it was because he didn't want it, just like he and Lin Cece back then. If he didn't want it, he didn't want it, and if he didn't want it, he didn't want it at all. In the end, he said lightly, "Lu Wei, let's forget it." He didn't want to force himself to hug a woman he didn't want to hug. It wasn't because Qin Chen was back, but because he could already see the future between him and Lu Wei. A marriage could be without love, but it couldn't be without sex. How could a woman he didn't even want to hug be the one he wanted? How could she be the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with? Under Lu Wei's shocked gaze, he said in a low voice, "I'm sorry. I'll give you appropriate compensation. You can unilaterally announce that you want to break up. There's no limit to the reason." Lu Wei's tears fell. "But I don't want compensation." Men always had some tender feelings for women who were crying like pear blossoms in the rain, not to mention that he had let her down first. So he said in a low voice, "But what I can give you now is compensation." Lu Wei took a step back and looked at him in disbelief. "You still want to be with her? She's married, and she even has a child. You still want her?" Lan Yu was a little upset, and his face slowly turned cold. "Our business has nothing to do with her. How is it not related?" Lu Wei smiled gently. You weren't like this before. Although you were cold, you would never treat me like this. She murmured, but she's back, and everything is different. You only have her in your eyes, and you can't do anything to me even if I strip naked in front of you. I believe you when you say you're tired, but you, Lu Wei wiped her tears. Tell me, have you always treated me as Qin Chen's substitute? No. Lan Yu said firmly. Lu Wei's eyes lit up at first, then dimmed. She sneered, of course not. Given her position in your heart, how can you compare her with other women? Lan Yu's gaze turned completely cold, as if that little bit of gentleness from before had never existed. Yes, he had never loved her. No, he had never liked her. Lu Wei laughed at herself. When you think it through, contact my secretary, and we can talk about compensation, he said briefly, and then went to change clothes, ready to leave. Without a trace of reluctance, he walked out in a straight line. When he grabbed the door handle, Lu Wei forcefully threw the ingredients he used to cook at him and said hysterically, Paella is also Qin Chen's favorite, right? Lan Yu, you bastard. Lan Yu's back was miserable. He paused, but did not turn around. He didn't say that perhaps she had shown this side of her in the past, and he might have treated her as a substitute. However, a substitute was a substitute, and he would never fall in love with her. Lan Yu went downstairs. When he got into his car, he frowned at the smell of onions on him. However, he didn't start the car immediately. He just sat in the car and smoked. He thought of Lu Wei's words, and then smiled faintly. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.